Welcome to the course of Social Network Analysis. Social network analysis is a very interdisciplinary research method. It can be applied to both social sciences and natural science. Throughout this course, we'll provide a lot of examples of social network analysis in different disciplines. We'll also look into the social networks that have propelled social movement and coalition development. Of course, in this digital era, we'll look into people's collective behavior, both online, such as social media, and offline, such as face-to-face interactions. In this course, we'll learn the basic knowledge on social network analysis as both a theoretical perspective and an analytical tool. We will learn how to conceptualize, construct, and analyze social networks. First and foremost, what is network? A network consists of nodes and ties. Nodes are also called actors or vertices. Ties are also called links or edges. There are 6 nodes in the graph you see on the screen, and these 6 nodes are connected by 5 ties. When you read a paper of network analysis, the first thing you need to do is to figure out what nodes and ties represent. As a researcher who conducts social network analysis, you can be very creative and innovative to conceptualize what nodes and ties represent in your own research. Based on different representations of nodes and ties in networks, there are 4 types of networks: social networks, biological networks, information networks, and technological networks. In social networks, the most commonly studied social ties in social network analysis are friendship ties, which represent who are friends with whom; advice-seeking ties, which represent who goes to whom for advice or who offers whom advice; communication ties, which represent who communicates with whom; and acquaintance ties, which represent who knows whom. In social networks, nodes usually represent people. But this is not the only way for you to conceptualize a social network. If you study how people communicate in an organization, you can also use nodes to represent teams, departments, and even organizations. The second type of networks is biological network. An example is our brain. We have about 87 billion neurons in our brains. Neurons are specialized brain cells that combine several inputs to generate a single output. What you see on the left is a neuron. During early pregnancy, neurons multiply at a rate of 250,000 neurons per minute. Each neuron is an information processing unit, with the branch-like input unit called dendrite, the metabolic center called cell body, and the output unit called axon. How do neurons receive and transmit information? Neurons utilizes both electrical signals and chemical messengers at synapses. Once an electrical impulse has reached the end of an axon, the information must be transmitted across the synaptic gap to the dendrites of the next neuron. Chemical or electrical signals that reach the dendrites produce small voltage changes across the cell's membrane, which are routed to the cell body. When the sum of the voltage changes reaches a point of no return called a threshold, the neurons fires a large electrical spike that can travel at speeds of up to 150 meters per second along an axon to another set of dendrites. Here, chemical or electrical signals pass the information onto the next set of dendrites. Each neuron decides whether to relay a message to the next neuron. But collectively, about 86 billion of neurons are connected together in the big electrochemical organ. The function of human brains is much more than aggregating the functions of neurons. How do consciousness, memory, and personality emerge from activities in neurons? How human brains work is probably one of the most fascinating frontiers of science. The third type of networks is information network. The World Wide Web is an information network in which the nodes are web pages consisting of text or pictures, and the ties are the hyperlinks that allow us to navigate from one web page to another web page. Another example of an information network is a citation network, in which nodes are papers and ties are citations. If paper A cites paper B, then there is a tie connecting the two papers. Citation networks have some interesting statistics. About 47% of all papers in the Science Citation Index have never been cited at all. Only 21% of all papers have 10 or more citations, and just 1% have 100 citations or more. These patterns follow power law distribution. We'll discuss more in the future weeks. In addition to using nodes to represent papers, you can also use nodes to represent journals. This is the journal citation network I created. In this network, the nodes represent the journals, and the ties represent which journals cited which journals. The fourth type of networks is technological networks. They are the physical infrastructure networks, such as the internet, power grids, transportation networks, delivery and distribution networks, and telephone networks. For example, the internet is a collection of computers linked by data connections such as cables. A power grid can be considered as a network as well. Duncan Watts began his book, 6 Degrees: The Science of a Connected Age, by an example of a power system failure in 1996. It started with a single transmission line in Western Oregon on August 10th. It ended up with a cascade failure that disrupted service to 7.5 million people on the West Coast. One of the factors that led to the power failure was our very limited understanding of the interdependent network system of the power grid. In this network, generators are connected by transmission lines. So generators can be considered as nodes and transmission lines can be considered as ties. We have a pretty good understanding of how to generate power. The physics of power generation was developed in the 19th century. If we consider how generators work to generate electricity as individual behavior of each generator, does that mean the collective behavior of a power grid is the aggregation of how generators work? The answer is no. This is very similar to other types of networks. In social networks of an organization such as NASA, no one has enough information to solve or even fully understand the problem of building Apollo that would eventually land on the moon. But the organization, as a collective entity, can innovate. The collective behavior of an organization is not a simple aggregation of all individuals' knowledge and resources. How does individual behavior aggregate to collective behavior? This is the question that network science tries to answer. Networks are complex systems. One feature of complex systems is that the parts making up the whole don't sum up in any simple fashion. The parts interact with each other. Through interaction, collective behavior emerges. More importantly, the collective behavior is different from individual behavior. You are likely to behave differently when you are alone and when you are in groups. This idea has a name in complexity science: emergence. Emergence occurs when an entity has new properties that cannot be explained by the properties of its parts, as the new properties don't exist previously at the micro level. The new properties emerge only when the parts interact. Examples of emergence are everywhere. The properties of water emerge from the combination of hydrogen and oxygen atoms. There are properties of hydrogen and oxygen atoms, but they cannot be used to explain the properties of water. The new properties of water are irreducible and are more than the sum of its parts. Likewise, you cannot reduce traffic patterns to individual cars because the traffic patterns are more than the sum of its parts. Another example is your conscious thought at any given moment. Your thought emerges from neurons in your brain. The neurons have its own metabolism and functions, but they cannot be used to explain how your thought emerges exactly. Your thoughts, particularly the creative ones, cannot be predicted by calculating the activities of neurons. If you look broader, you will see in social settings, each individual has his or her own thoughts and opinions. But the characteristics of multiple brains, along with their thoughts and opinions, it's not sufficient to explain collective human behavior in organizations and in societies. This is why good leadership research does not just focus on one individual leader. According to emergence, it is not sufficient to use individual leader behavior to explain organizational outcomes. Networks can be studied mathematically. The history of studying networks mathematically can be traced back to 1735. Leonhard Euler, born in Switzerland, was probably one of the greatest mathematicians ever lived. One of his achievements was the development of graph theory, as he tried to solve the problem known as the Seven Bridges of Königsberg. Königsberg was a city with 7 bridges, which were highlighted in green color. The problem was posed like this: could a person take a walk across all 7 bridges without crossing the same bridge twice? Is it possible? What do you think? Euler proved that it is impossible, and his mathematical demonstration was considered to be the first theorem of graph theory, which became one of the foundational theories in network science. Since then, the graph theory has grown steadily to become a major branch of mathematics. The graph theory has been applied to many disciplines, including sociology, anthropology, computer science, physics, biology, and economics. Each field has its own version and terminology of a theory of networks. This is because each field focuses on different individual behavior and collective behavior. We will spend more time talking about graph theory next week. It is very important to conceptualize networks as dynamic entities. That is, networks themselves are evolving and changing constantly. Your ideas tomorrow are shaped by your ideas and thoughts today due to our associative memory. Likewise, your social networks tomorrow are shaped by your social networks today. There is something special about the social networks, which is called clustering. Clustering refers to the tendency of two individuals who share a mutual friend to be friends themselves. For example, you first write down the names of your best friends. You then write down the names of your best friends' best friends. It is likely you'll see many of the same names. This is called clustering. Clustering has other names, including homophily and preferential attachment. Despite different terminology, the fundamental idea behind the different names is the same. Birds of a feather flock together. People have a tendency to like people who are similar to themselves on socially significant attributes. One function of clustering is to create redundancy in networks. Redundancy makes networks resilient if things go awry. For example, a power grid system should design redundancy into its system so that one generator going down does not create a widespread power failure. Social networks are highly clustered. But not every social network is clustered by the same factor. Some social networks are clustered by people's race. Some social networks are clustered by socioeconomic status. Other social networks are clustered by religion, hobby, rationality, or the neighborhood people live in. We'll learn how to test which factors contribute to the network clustering later in this semester. Network analysis is usually conducted at three levels: the dyad level of analysis, node level analysis, group or network level of analysis. At the dyad level of analysis, we focus on the dyadic relationship between a pair of nodes. If you are interested in how the political views of students in this class affect the formation of friendship ties over this semester, then you'll conduct a dyad level of analysis. Your focus will be on pairs of students with similar or dissimilar political views. At the node level, we focus on the structural position of nodes in the network. For example, we can calculate the centrality of nodes in the network. We can also calculate clustering coefficient of nodes, which is a measure of the degree to which nodes in the network tend to cluster together. At the group or network level of analysis, we focus on the network as a whole. For example, we can calculate how fractured a network is. We can also calculate the density of a network. Some people may ask, what's the difference between quantitative research methods and social network analysis? One fundamental difference is that quantitative methods assume independence of observation, that is, each individual is independent. But the fundamental assumption of social network analysis is interdependence. So the analytical techniques of social network analysis are different from quantitative methods. Moreover, network analysis can be used to analyze qualitative data. If you use interview data or publicly available documents to investigate who talked to whom and who donated how much money to what campaigns, you can construct networks that describe policymaking process. If you consider each word is a node and a tie connects a pair of words if they co-occur in a sentence, then you construct co-word networks and co-occurrence networks. The clusters indicate the topics in the textual data. Here is an example of hashtag co-occurrence networks I created using the tweets containing hashtags Common Core, and CCSS. You will learn how to create networks like this and then analyze them in the upcoming weeks. To analyze textual data, you can also conceptualize a tie that connects subjects and verbs in sentences and then investigate who did what. There are so many innovative ways to construct networks. You may come up with more creative ways to use network analysis to analyze qualitative data. In this video, we have an overview of social network analysis. There are a lot of new terms and jargons. If you are overwhelmed by them, don't worry. We'll discuss each of those new terms in the following weeks. Next week, we'll focus on graph theory.